We're going to define what sin is according to the Bible. Recapping, lesson 30 was, what did God require of Adam and Eve in order to live in the Garden of Eden? And the answer is, Adam was required to obey God perfectly. Lesson 31, did Adam obey God? No, Adam chose to disobey God. Lesson 32, what is sin? That's the new one for today. What is sin? Sin is the transgression of God's law. 33, I'm just going to give you the title and I'll probably cover these two together. 33 is, what is meant by transgression? Transgression is failing to do what God commands and doing what God forbids. So there's some interesting things to look at with this, because basically we're going to define what sin is according to the Bible. I've heard people say all the time, sin is missing the mark. Sin is missing the mark. And I thought, I understand the illustration, but I don't use that illustration. That's what other people would say about it. God gave a perfect standard, and if you shoot and you miss, that's sin. That's basically what they're saying sin is. Those kind of things I don't like. I don't like, number one, because the Bible pretty well defines what sin is, and it has its own illustrations for it. And when you're saying you're missing the mark, there's a lot of things you can infer from that. Like, number one, I can just do better, because if I miss, then I can just shoot again and I can hit it. And no, because sin is not doing better. You can't stop being a sinner. It's in your DNA. See, that's the biggest problem is sin is what you do, but the nature, we're sinners. Sinners is in our blood and it's in our DNA. And kind of one of the old standard phrases is, we sin because we're sinners. Sin does not make us a sinner. We sin because we're sinners. Okay? We lie because we're liars. Now that's the exact opposite of what you're going to find in the world. The nature of man, as according to Jeremiah, is the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. I think we've gone over how fallen man is, so I don't want to repeat it too much. What man teaches is he lies, therefore he's a liar, which is true. I'm not saying that's not true. But the Bible teaches that we have those things, the sin is already in us. Yeah, let's go to Mark 7. That's where I want to go. Mark 7. Mark 7, verses 20 to 23. Of course, the question in context is, you eat something, therefore you're unclean, the disciples. It's like, why are you eating things? Don't you know that makes you unclean? And Jesus says, well, because that's what the law said. Again, everything we read from the New Testament that there's confusion about was because that's what the law said. That's how God set it up. The general gist and thrust of the law is that you had to give your heart attention to it. You don't keep the law by just the letter of the law, which is what Jesus expanded on a lot. It was, you keep the law by understanding the intent, following it with your heart. And that's what he said here, Mark chapter 7, starting in verse 20. And he said, that which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. For from within, out of the heart of men proceed. And there's 13 things here. Evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within and defile the man. So those things come from the heart, and you already do them. You already are a sinner. You're born a sinner. And the sin in this case is just acting on who you already are. You sin because you're a sinner. That's just something good to know. That's also reasons why when I catch somebody, or somebody who's done some really bad things, it's like Jesus said in Corinthians, he said, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. If you think you're the one that's doing okay, watch out. Because you could sin and fall just as easily as anybody else if given the proper circumstances and proper situation. And I've learned that in a couple areas over the years, judging somebody else, and then years later that my circumstances change, and then I was like, oh, I'm facing the same exact temptation as what I judged and hated other people for earlier. That's why I've also noticed that a lot of times the thing that somebody becomes the most vehement and angry and emotional about, usually that's the thing they struggle with, that individual. None of that's really anything to do with this. That's just kind of background information. But what is sin? Sin is the transgression of the law. As we think about hurricanes Helene, and there's an M already that's in the Gulf. How did it go from H to M? Over like 2 weeks. Wow. We would think, a normal person would think that the most terrifying, frightening thing in the world would be something like that, a hurricane. Others might say, well, it's war. Others would say, well, it's disease and sickness. Some might say, well, it's poverty. Some might say it's lack of education. All those things are, I guess, in part true, but the foundation of every single one of those comes back to the Bible and comes back to Adam and Eve. The reason we have poverty, disease, sickness, war, death, hurricanes, the reason we have any of that is because of sin. Sin is the root problem that everyone has to deal with and that affects the world. The world itself fell, not just Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve fell. Their son, their oldest son, became a murderer. That didn't take long, I don't think, in order for something serious like that to come out of man, because we're all fallen. Don't be so quick to hate on other people. God's standard is judging you by your heart condition. And he does judge you by your works that you do too, but if you, as Jesus has said several times, if you've looked on a woman to lust after her, that's adultery. You've committed it. It's like, what? What do you mean I've committed it? I'll look. Murder, Jesus said. You don't have to pick the knife up. You don't have to pick the gun up. If you hate that guy, if you look at somebody with hatred, then you've already committed the act of murder. That's the standard that God sets. So sin is destructive, and we're going to look at some Bible definitions of what sin is. We're going to look at 1 John chapter 3 and verse 4 to start off. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. This is where this phrase comes in, transgression. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. Sin is the transgression of the law. So you kind of have to know what the law says if you want to know what sin is. And that's something that there's a witnessing technique and method that's very good at talking to somebody about the Lord, and they take them through the law. They take them through the Ten Commandments. It's really good to be able to know and quote the Ten Commandments just off the top of your head. Now, we're going to get into some more things here, but I want to look at some other verses that talk about what sin is. Sin is very serious, and I have five things that I've memorized that define for me, according to the Bible, what sin is. And it starts over in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 24. Now, these are just going to be from my memory. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 9. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 9. What does that say? The thought of foolishness is sin, and the scorner is an abomination of men. Now, that just cuts right to the heart. That cuts deep with everybody right off the go. You mean to tell me that sin is not an action? If you're breaking the law, man's law, it's an action that you have to take. You have to actually take a step over the line into your neighbor's property in order to trespass. You have to actually grab a stick of gum from the store or a saw blade from the store and pocket it or slip it between pieces of plywood as you're walking out, knowing that the cashier won't look between the 20 sheets of plywood you have stacked up on your cart, so you can slip little things in there. That's an act. That's called thievery, murder. It's an act you have to do. Now, there's other things called conspiracy to commit, but planning is also an act, conspiracy to commit. But this goes even deeper, because who in the world, there's no court on this earth that can judge you based on the thoughts that go in your head. And that's a blessing. I mean, I control my thoughts mostly, but there's some thoughts I don't control. And especially if you ever get in a mood of depression, which we all do, there's some funny, interesting thoughts that come through your brain during those times. And they might involve murder, suicide. They might involve who knows any number of things. And the depravity of man is great. And those are your thoughts. Okay, the Bible says the thought of foolishness is sin. Boom. There's God's bomb right there. You want to know what a sin is? It's the thoughts in your head. If they don't align to God's standard, your own brain, your own thoughts you think, sin. Who can meet that standard? Although we're already seeing the problem. Nobody alive who's ever lived could ever match that standard that God gave, because we have already moved away from the physical acts of things. We read in 1 John 3:4, the sin is the transgression of the law. So if the law says it, if you transgress the law, you break the law. That's sin. Okay. But here we are. The thought of foolishness is sin. All right, let's see what else the Bible says. Because, oh my goodness, we're already done for. You don't have to look for the other ones. We can go over to James chapter 4, 17. James 4:17. James 4:17. Now, here's another one. James chapter 4, verse 17. All right, here we go. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. That's another bomba, is what they say in Ukrainian. Bomba, it's another bomb. Why? Well, again, sin is not, in this case, it's not you crossing the line. It's not you taking the saw blade. It's not you sleeping with somebody you shouldn't. Sin is if you know there's something that you should do that's good, but you don't do it. That's sin. That's huge. How many actions have you done that you knew were the right thing to do, but you didn't? Well, okay, you've broken God's sin laws. And you just said laziness. Perfect. That's a great example. That's a huge example. Guilty practically every single day of my life. Starting with that early first alarm clock that goes off in the morning. I know it'd be good for me too. Guilty. To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. The next one is in Romans chapter 14, verse 23. Romans chapter 14 and verse 23. Romans chapter 14, verse 23. And he that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith. For whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Okay, so I took this job because it was better for my family. Did you do it on faith for the Lord? Did you pray and ask the Lord's direction? Did you ask to see if God wanted you to do it? Okay, if you didn't do it on faith, it's sin. Okay, if I didn't give money to a preacher or missionary because I just don't have it in my pocket. I'm not saying don't give what you don't have, but I've heard multitudes of churches, pastors say that we needed to do something, a project, building project, and so first thing we did is we gave money to the Lord. We picked up a new missionary to support them, and we trusted that the Lord would bless us because of that, and he did. So not doing something, I just can't do it, not of faith, okay? Sin. I don't want my child to be a preacher. I don't want my child to be a missionary because I'm going to lose them and they're going to raise their kids overseas in Africa or in Asia or in the Ukraine or blah, blah, blah. And that happens all the time. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. These aren't your standard laws, see. These aren't your standard definitions. This isn't what people think. Okay? Nobody thinks on faith anymore. I can point you to any number of people that it's all about what works for the family. I got to work on Sundays because that's the only, I have to make my money. I have to pay for the bills. I have to take care of the family. In order to do that, I work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day because I just have to go. All right. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Sin is the transgression of the law, or the thought of foolishness is sin. To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And we're just looking at now whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Now, these are topics really that you could spend a long time studying, looking at them, really to understand the verses better. Of course, we're just doing a very quick glance at them. And then, of course, the last one would be in 1 John chapter 5. Back to 1 John. 1 John chapter 5 and down in verse 17. 1 John chapter 5, verse 17, it says, all unrighteousness is sin. And there is a sin not unto death. Of course, there's always phrases and words, don't really know what they mean all the time, but all unrighteousness is sin. All right. So we have a country of America that's very immoral right now. And you can go to a car race 4 years ago and you'll hear a chant from the crowd, let's go Brandon. Except they're not saying, let's go Brandon. Publicly, where any kid is, it used to be American men would never swear in front of ladies, women. And then that fell off the wayside. Then it used to be they would never swear in front of kids. And that went off the wayside. And now you can just public chant where everybody's screaming it. Let's go Brandon. What is that? That's unrighteousness. And then you can that's on our side, see. I say our side. I don't have a side. I'm with the Lord. Both sides I think are corrupt and fallen. But even looking at both candidates, do we have a single righteous candidate that's running for president? I don't think so. And honestly, it's been a long time since we've had a righteous candidate. When one side's direct main policy, why they're trying to get votes, is murder. I want to murder unborn children. That's our nation. All unrighteousness is sin. When we say Western standards or Western principles, that used to mean Bible principles. Now Western principles means pro-gay, pro-homosexuality. To be pro-Western, according to Europe now. That means to be pro-human rights. We love everybody. What is that? Unrighteousness. You're building a nation. Our nation is continuing on unrighteousness. Anything that's immoral, anything that's wrong, that's against the rightness of God. Halloween's coming up. Guess what? It just gets worse every year, especially with occultism invading practically the whole country. Any of the major singers, guess who they are? They're practitioners, or in some way they bow to it and like it. The most popular one now is Taylor Swift. What is she? Oh, she's a practitioner. Everyone is. Everyone who gets up to that high, that's who they are. Unrighteous. They are practitioners of unrighteousness in one shape, way, or another. Those are the 5 big Bible definitions of what sin is. And next time we're going to continue on to see kind of another explanation of it, which is also equally as important to understand. I like to hold those 5 definitions kind of in my head to be able to show that God's standard for sin is very great. It's very big. His standard literally is perfection at all times of your life, every second of the day. That's what he expects. If you want to say I'm a good person, that's the expectation from God. And it goes so much deeper than just how you live your life, how clean your house is, if you treat your neighbors good, if you try to help others. No, it goes way deeper. It goes way deeper. It goes down into what you do, what you don't do, what your thoughts are, and then goes right into your heart. And God sees the very thoughts and intents of your heart just as much as he sees your outward actions. And the standard's perfection. And you slip up once, you fail, you're failure. That's what sin is. Sin is a transgression of the law. And we sin because we're sinners. It's written right into our DNA. There is no hope for mankind. Man will not solve his own problems outside of Jesus Christ, outside of God saving a person, giving them a new heart, washing them in the blood of Jesus Christ, giving them new desires, new intentions, new goals, new focus, new written instructions. It's the only hope for anybody, including our presidents and our leaders of America, including the Middle East, including the Far East, including Russia and Ukraine. The only hope is for gospel preachers to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ and for a revival to happen from God. That's all that's going to happen. All right. Well, I think that's good.